When you couple partnership with purpose and urgency, we become unstoppable as human beings, thinking about what all of us can do uniquely, but also what we can do when we come together in collectives. And that's, again, where that magic happens. Our lives light up and we become who we are and become better humans when we're in service to others.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session with Jean Oelwang. Thank you all for being here. I would love to take a moment just to introduce myself and our wonderful speakers today. I'm Soumya. I am one of the SVPs in the Multi-Industry Skills team at the Tech and Media Club. That's a mouthful. And today we're very lucky to have with us Jean Oelwang. She is an amazing speaker. She is also the founding CEO and president of Virgin Unite. So Jean has dedicated over 15 years to embedding purpose in organizations. She has collaborated with 25 Virgin businesses across 15 industries. She's also incubated powerful global initiatives such as the Elders, Ocean Unite, Carbon War Room, and the B Team, which, if you do not know, is a global collective of leaders who are dealing with the question of how to do business in a way that serves humanity. Somehow, amidst all of these other achievements, she's also managed to write a book called Partnering, where she delves into 6 principles underpinning the most productive collaborations. And these are based on her own partnerships with incredible, inspiring individuals such as Sir Richard Branson, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and even Ben & Jerry, among many others. Jean is not only a trailblazer in social entrepreneurship, she's also a wonderful speaker who has shared her transformative insights on TED and TEDx stages. And we're very excited to announce that Jean has offered to share some of these insights with us today, kicking off this fireside chat with the presentation. We're so excited to learn more about your book, your work, and your journey, Jean, and thank you for being here. And our wonderful moderator today is John Ratcliffe. John is very closely connected to LBS. He has spearheaded amazing speaker sessions in the last few months at LBS, whether that's with clubs like TMC, Marketing and Strategy Club, or the Retail, Luxury and Consumer Club. He has also guest lectured and organized lecture series here at LBS since 2009. John brings a wealth of expertise in the video industry as he's the founder and CEO of Engage Video Group, a South African media firm specializing in using a data-driven approach to optimize social media content. He knows the tech and media worlds like the back of his hand, having previously worked as the head of advertising at Google, overseeing YouTube sales. He is also a Global Agenda Council member for the World Economic Forum, and with his advisory role at the Nelson Mandela Center for Memory, we are so thrilled that John will bring his social impact-driven lens to guide us through today's conversation on social enterprise and meaningful partnerships. John, thank you for being here and for moderating our session today. And now, without further ado, let's dive into this exciting session with Jean starting her presentation. Thank you all.
Wonderful. A huge thanks, Soumya, for that beautiful introduction. I'm just going to take you with me from now on everywhere I go. So a massive thanks. And I just want to also say thanks right up front to John, to Bridget, to Alex, who have been extraordinary in helping us pull this together today. And also to Lucas, who is very kindly going to be helping me with the slides. So I think, Lucas, we can probably go ahead and put up the first slide. But just actually, before we dive into the presentation, I also just want to acknowledge that the world is in a deep place of collective grieving right now. And I just want to also acknowledge all of you on the call who may have lost loved ones in Israel and Palestine and Ukraine. And there's also 32 other conflicts raging around the world right now. So it is the highest number of conflicts that we've ever had since World War II in the world right now. And over 2 billion people around the world are actually living in a conflict zone. So something's not working. We have a lot of work to do as human beings to reinvent and reimagine how we come together. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited and honored to be talking to all of you on this call today. So thank you for taking the time to do this, because I feel like, even though this is a moment of deep discombobulation and trauma in the world, it's also a moment where it's probably one of the most important times to be alive, and important times to have leaders like all of you on this call coming into the world, into amazing careers, because it's almost as if someone has smacked a big red reset button on the wall, and the whole world has woken up to realize that we need to reimagine and reinvent our systems. And that's going to take a level of collaboration that we cannot even begin to imagine. And yet right now, we are actually pushing ourselves in the other direction. And if we go to the next slide, please, Lucas, thank you. And this starts for us at a really young age. I know for me, it actually started in kindergarten, and I had the most amazing parents. My mom was a nurse, and my dad started out as a credit collector at a store called Sears in America. And they worked so hard because they wanted us to have everything that they hadn't had growing up. And so I think that started for me to have this sense of responsibility that I needed to make sure I didn't let them down. So right from the time that I started school, I wanted to make sure I got that gold star. I was the top of the class. And then this was perpetuated when I went to university. And I remember my very, very first boss in telecommunications, who was a well-meaning boss, gave me 2 books. And the first one, if we just go to the next slide, Lucas, was The Art of War, on how to survive in corporate America. And just in case I didn't survive in The Art of War, he gave me a second book, which was The Joy of Cooking. And as you can all see by the burnt edge in the cookbook, that I never, ever learned how to cook. But what happened at this moment in my life is I became really focused on how do I break as many glass ceilings as possible without having to use weapons of mass destruction. And so I became focused at the time I was working in telecommunications. For those of you in South Africa, I moved to South Africa in the mid-90s to help set up MTN, which was a super exciting opportunity. And I found over this, say, 20-year period of working in telecommunications, the more and more glass ceilings I broke, the more and more, as I got up into CEO roles, as I got up into board roles, the more and more I felt alone and not myself anymore. So I started to really look into what was most important to me. And I started to look around me and started to see that really investing in relationships was one of the things that was most important to me. Yet, because I'd been so focused on this goal, I had become, again, more and more distant from really what was central and important to me. And we had an amazing opportunity to work with a group of global leaders. And looking at them, it was people like Mandela, like Grassa, like Archbishop Tutu. And in looking at them, they really became who they were through their relationships. So I became really, really focused on how did we become so disconnected as a world? And how do we make sure we relearn how to build these deep connections in our lives that make us who we are in the world? So if we go to the next slide, one of the things that was really, really clear was that social media is having an impact of actually separating us in many cases, even though it's also bringing us together in many cases. And I always feel like that share button should be called the compare button, because I think we're setting up these unrealistic expectations. And then we're almost pushing people into mental health crisis. And they just did many major studies to look at heavy users of social media have a higher indice of having mental health issues. And, you know, I was with this amazing young group of leaders in Miami a few weeks ago, and I asked them, I said, what is the biggest issue facing your generation right now? And they looked at me and they said, the biggest issue is that we're stuck in our social media bubbles. And if we go to the next slide, that's also perpetuating right now this polarization in the world and really creating this fear of difference. And this is being created by all kinds of things right now. And one of the scariest statistics that I heard this year was the Edelman Trust Barometer that does a study every single year. They've done it for 20 years. And they interview about, I think it's 28,000 people in 30 plus countries. And they asked the question this year, if someone had differing views than you, would you help them if they were in need? And 70% of people said they would not help someone in need if they had differing views. 80%, if we click again, said that they would not want to live in the same neighborhood if someone had differing views. And another 80% said they would not want to work in the same company if someone had differing views. So we are so far apart right now. And this is actually, again, perpetuating. Julianne Hunt-Lundstedt found that she just did a major study on loneliness. And she found that obesity and smoking are actually less deadly than loneliness. So loneliness is more deadly than obesity and smoking in the world right now. And yet, if we go to the next slide, we've spent the last 18 years studying great successful people and great human collaborations. And what we found is that all of these people had a secret power, and it wasn't the breadth of their skills or the breadth of their experience. Their secret power was their ability to collaborate and to partner. And for all of you that are coming into the world right now, into your careers, I really believe that that collaboration, that partnering is probably going to be one of the most important skills that you need to have as you enter into a world that's very, very complex and very interconnected right now. And the good news is that that's also the path to a healthy, long-lasting life. There's this amazing study called the Harvard Grant Study, where they took about 600 men. And the interesting thing about this study is that they studied them over 80 years of their lives. So this study is still going on for some of them. And in the beginning, they were trying to find out what makes a long, healthy, lasting life. And they thought it was going to be things like what we ate, how much we exercised, but the single most important factor was the relationships that these men had nurtured. And it wasn't about the breadth of the relationships like we're taught to believe right now. It was about the depth of relationship. And it wasn't easy. It was hard work. And it was the men who leaned into that hard work of building these relationships that lived the long, healthy lives as they studied them over these 80 years. And the other beautiful thing as we've been studying these relationships for the last 18 years is we've also found that it's these group of friends that have allowed us to do these extraordinary things, whether that's ending apartheid in South Africa, whether that's ending smallpox in India, or whether that's actually discovering and protecting the ozone layer. And if we go to the next slide, thanks, Lucas. It was really interesting because we spent the last 5 years talking to everyone we could who was part of probably one of the greatest collective human achievements of our time, which was actually discovering that there was an issue with the ozone layer and then protecting it. And I really believe we don't talk about this because it wasn't a single superhero like we're taught to believe. It was this collective of friends that made this incredible achievement happen. And it started with these two extraordinary people that you see on the screen. You have Sherwood Rowland on your right and Mario Molina on your left. And in 1974, these two scientists and friends discovered that CFCs, which I'm sure no one in this call remembers from the 70s, but they were in everything. They were in hairspray, they were in deodorant, they were in refrigerators, but they were causing damage to the ozone layer. And what was going to happen if we didn't repair that is we ultimately would have had to be nocturnal creatures. We wouldn't have been able to go out into the sunshine without immediately getting sunburned. Our food systems would have collapsed. But these two, when they discovered this, they felt so passionate about this looming disaster that they immediately published an article in Nature magazine, and they thought the whole world would react. And instead, the exact opposite happened. You had the $8 billion CFC industry attacking their character, calling them Russian spies. You had their fellow professors pulling speaking engagements out from under them. You had doctoral students stop coming to their classes. And this didn't last just for a day or a week or a month. This lasted for an entire decade. And I had the good fortune to meet Mario before he sadly passed in 2020. And I asked him, I said, how on earth, Mario, did you weather these attacks on your character and still keep on going? And he smiled at me and he said one word. He said, friendship. He said, Sherry and I were so close that we were never going to stop until the world listened. And they didn't. And 10 years later, 3 scientists and friends in the UK proved that there was a hole near the South Pole. And that sparked the whole world to get behind this. So you had this fiery Egyptian diplomat, Mustafa Tolba, who became the lead architect of the Montreal Protocol. You had Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan rallying countries around the world. You had a whole cast of characters that became friends and made the Montreal Protocol happen, which then protected the ozone layer and allows us to sit in the sunshine still today. And again, we don't talk about that because we're so pushed towards hyper-individualism that we don't celebrate these great collective achievements. And we'll talk about a few more when we are in conversation with John. But fortunately, we've had the chance, if we go to the next slide, thank you, Lucas, we've had the beautiful chance to work on about 18 collectives over the last 20 years, helping build them and then spin them out on all different kinds of topics, whether it's business as a force for good, whether it's reduction of carbon in the atmosphere. But the very first one we did, which South Africa is near and dear to my heart because I lived there in the mid-90s and 95, working with MTN. And then I also had the great privilege and pleasure to help incubate with a team and with partners, the Elders. And the Elders is really an idea that Peter Gabriel and Richard Branson had, and then Nelson Mandela and his amazing wife, Graça Machel, founded it. And it was really an idea about how do we get together this extraordinary collective of leaders that can work on behalf of the humanity and the planet with no other agenda. And they really focus right now on four things. One is conflict resolution, which is, as you can imagine, as I mentioned, 32 conflicts in the world right now. The second one is pandemics. The third is around nuclear threat. And then the fourth is around climate and planet. And many of these folks were my heroes when I first had the chance to start working with them some 18 years ago now. And so I put them up on this pedestal. But what's really interesting over the 18 years when I started to look at how they became who they were in the world, what was very, very clear to me is they became who they were because of the extraordinary partnerships that they nurtured around themselves, whether it was with each other, whether it was with their romantic partners, with the people they worked with. So I became obsessed with two questions. The first question was, how do we individually build these great partnerships, these deep connections in our lives? And then second, how do we ladder them up to be these large-scale collaborations? And so if we go to the next slide, thank you, Lucas. So we went right to the source. And we went out and interviewed about 65 plus of some of the world's greatest partnerships and greatest collaborations. And they were all kinds of partnerships and collaborations. So they were romantic, they were friends, they were business leaders, they were scientists. But what was really beautiful is that as soon as we started to do the interviews, we started to see these amazing patterns emerge about how they build these deep connections. And I'll share those patterns in a minute. But first, I just want to bring their voices into the room with a short video, because this is their wisdom, not mine. So if we just click to the video, thank you so much, Lucas.
The one will make up what is lacking in the other. And in these parts, we speak of it as Ubuntu. A person is a person through other persons.
A lot of people believe that partnership is 1 and 1 equal 2. It's wrong. 1 and 1 equal 2, you have no added value.
1 + 1 = 3 is when the relationship is perfect.
The goal is not to be better than the other and make a competition. The goal is to be better than what we were before.
It's been a lot more fun doing it with somebody else. Everything in life is a lot more fun if you share it.
During the growth of Ben & Jerry's, I would walk around the company and say, oh, this is wrong, that sucks, that's fucked up, don't do that. And he'd be walking behind me saying, well, what Ben really meant to say was, you know, do this and that. And it was, you know, he could say it in a way that people could hear it.
Choose somebody that you've already worked with before.
If you ask me what I value about Robbie, it would be first and foremost our friendship. We're almost always aligned on major strategic things, big items for the company, because more or less we have the same goal.
You need somebody, you know, poking the fire and saying, you know, this isn't as good as it could be.
That kind of tough love advice is pretty welcome when it happens.
Give each other plenty of space, even you're going to be different people.
And he always listened to me. He didn't always react the way I wanted him to, but he always listened to me.
We complement each other rather than being echoes of each other. It does require compromise and hard work. It has to be grounded.
You mean hard work?
We are friends before we're partners.
A lot of it's just about trust. You know, I think Ben and I just completely trusted each other.
You've always pushed me to do things that I thought maybe I couldn't do. Often I'll be in a situation, I'll think, what would Sev do? And then it's like, okay, I can do this.
Wow, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's so great.
I am a movement by myself, but I'm a force when we're together. it feels right, and it feels like it's what we were always meant to do.
I think we have a shared passion for improving the world around us.
You got more than me. Oh, dear.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lucas. We can go to the next slide. And as you can see, we had a load of fun in all of those interviews. And what emerged were these 6 degrees of connection. And I'll just touch on them very briefly, and then I'll share just a few stories of businesses that have really put them into play. Because this model can be used for your own life, for your personal relationships, can be used for a company, can be used to build a collaboration. And really the 6 degrees, the first one is having that something bigger, what I would call an intoxicating purpose, that really is like that North Star that gets you out of bed every morning. And, you know, Ben and Jerry weren't just building an ice cream company. They were building a company that they wanted to change the world. And when I asked them how they made it successful, they just giggled and they said, we were all in. We 100% had each other's backs. And then all of the partnerships and collaborations had this beautiful ecosystem of virtues of trust, respect, belief. And that was really central to keeping them together. And then there was these 2 other things that we hadn't expected. One was magnetic moments, which were those ways that the partnerships actually stayed together. They were rituals, they were practices, they were things that people did on a daily basis to keep, and traditions to keep them together. And then there was this amazing thing. All the partnerships had friction. No partnerships are void of friction. But what was beautiful is these partnerships lifted above that friction. They had the tools to lift them above back to something bigger. And we'll just share a few examples in a second. But before I do that, I remember being a few years ago at this gathering, and there was one person on one side of the room shouting and screaming that philanthropy was going to save the world, and another person on the other side of the room saying that business and commercial activity was going to save the world. And I remember just thinking, this is such a ridiculous argument, because we have so many issues that need to be solved in the world right now. We need all hands on deck. And the beautiful thing is we have a continuum of capital from commercial through to philanthropic, and some really exciting opportunities in the middle with social enterprises, with other models about how we work with government that we can co-create right now to bring into the world to help solve some of these problems. So I wanted to share a couple of those stories just briefly before John and I go into conversation. If we go to the next slide, I'll start with a commercial business, that's Airbnb. And their North Star was really about how do we create a world where anyone can belong anywhere? And they really built their business on trust. And so this was embedded in absolutely everything they did. And one magnetic moment that I love that helped them build trust was called elephants, dead fish, and vomit. And I know those 3 words sound incredibly odd in one sentence, but what they did is they got their team together every month and they talked about elephants in the room that no one was talking about, the dead fish that everyone was talking about and no one was doing anything about, and the vomit that people just needed to get off their chest. And they said that this one small ritual that they did monthly helped build this trust and this respect and created this open conversation so that before it got into conflict, they could hash through things. But they also weren't afraid to make mistakes, because a lot of people will ask me, what happens when you break one of those virtues? And we're all going to make mistakes. But what they did so beautifully is, for example, when COVID first started, they immediately reimbursed all of their guests. And of course, the hosts of those guests were furious because they just lost all of this income and they hadn't consulted them. So rather than hide from that, what Brian did is he wrote a letter to all the hosts apologizing and saying, we weren't a good partner. We should never have done this. And then they put a fund together to help support those hosts. So again and again, they lean into issues rather than avoiding them to make sure that they keep that trust. And if we go to the next slide, I'll just share just a couple more examples. Christian and Erica were an amazing partnership. They are an amazing partnership in Detroit. And Erica's dad passed away from diabetes in Detroit. And so what they started doing is just started cooking for their friends and family vegan food to start bringing healthy food into the community to save lives. And then it built and built and built. And then they started a restaurant called Detroit Soul Food in Detroit right now. And they said that people, laughed at first when they talked about vegan soul food. And now their restaurant is booming, doing super well. But again, it was the two of them coming together, very different people across complementary skills, that really made this happen and had a really clear something bigger of wanting to bring healthy food to save people's lives. And then if we go to the next slide, another example is this amazing organization called Planet. And this, the people that you see on the screen are Robbie and Will, and they started this company pretty much out of university. And what they decided is that they had a couple of years, I think, working at Google and a few other organizations, but they had this audacious vision. And I remember sitting with them, gosh, it must have probably been 17 years ago, and them talking about this vision. They wanted to image all parts of the Earth landmass every single day so that they could help make global change by actually making data transparent in the world. And so since then, they have built an extraordinarily successful company. It now has, they've built over 450 satellites, 200 are orbiting around the world right now, and they're able to help with emergency crises because they have these satellites where they can, again, bring transparent data immediately to a situation. They're able to help people see the levels of deforestation. They're able to help see when there's wildlife devastation, and on and on and on right now. And they've built this incredible customer base of not-for-profits, of government, of business. So a successful business that is having unbelievable, enormous change in the world. And if we go to the next slide, another example that's on the not-for-profit side, but using business principles, is something called Climate Trace. And this amazing guy, Gavin McCormack, and a group of about 50 other partners started this. And their premise and their idea, there's something bigger, was right now we're actually learning about carbon in the world through the actual people that are causing the issue, from businesses that are causing the issue. So they're telling us how much carbon they're putting into the world. And so what their idea was, how do we make that transparent? And so they partnered with a whole bunch of satellite companies. So again, they can now use AI and use data, and they can now get down to a building level to understand what is the carbon coming out of that building level. So they can do it on a building level, they can do it on a company level, on a nation level. They're also starting to look at methane tracking as well. And so this changes the whole dynamic by pulling that curtain back and giving transparency to what's happening from a carbon perspective into the world, and looking at how we can speed up getting to net zero by shining a spotlight on who those carbon emitters are right now. And they now they're actually analyzing, I think it's something like 59 trillion bytes of data. And this next one, Andy Cooper and Jim Roth, is a beautiful example. A lot of people will say, well, you can't have impact and still have a super profitable business. And that's rubbish. This is a beautiful example of that from two people I interviewed, Jim Roth and Andy Cooper. And Andy Cooper is South African, actually. And they were actually looking at services like financial services, health services for the poor. And what was really interesting is they saw a lot of great companies serving those customers, but they weren't getting capital investment into them. So what they did is they started up this investment fund that's called Leapfrog Investments. And it's grown and grown over time. It now reaches 5% of the world's population. The total revenue is over 4.4 billion. And the company actually, the growth rates of the businesses that they select and invest in have 24% growth across the portfolio annually, which is just extraordinary. And Andy talks a lot about what he's worried about in the world is that people are doing impact light. They're greenwashing impact, they're attaching it to their business. And so how do you make sure that we think about companies and think about how we can put impact at the center? And if we go to the next slide, the good news is it's also super good for business. I'm part of the board of an organization called Just Capital, and we've been tracking companies that have focused on ethical leadership, putting people first in their companies. And we've been mapping them against the Russell 1000. And as you can see, on the red, those are the companies that have really taken care of their people and put ethical leadership at the front. And those are the ones that are really outpacing the rest of the Russell 1000. So it's good for our bottom lines as well. And if we go to the last slide, or the last couple slides now, I just wanted to share, actually, we'll just go to the last one because I'm just conscious that I want to make sure we have some time for conversation. So one last story I just want to share is actually about my incredible father, who was my hero. And As I mentioned, he started as a credit collector for Sears and Roebuck, and he worked his way up to be a store manager. And my dad had a really rough time at the end of his life. He was in his 90s, and he was in and out of ICU constantly. And I was really fortunate one day to be at his bedside when he came out of a coma in ICU. And so I said, "Welcome back, Dad." And he looked at me and he said, "I'm going to spend the next 100 years of my life making sure I help people." And which was, made me smile because he was 95. And I asked him why. I said, "Why are you saying that, Dad?" And he talked about how when he was working, he felt like he had to work so hard to make sure that we had everything, which he did a brilliant job at in our lives. And he felt like he wanted to always do more for his community, and he was always torn between the two. And I had to smile when he was talking, because I remembered this big, beautiful brown book that we found a few months earlier when we were going through his boxes. And it had on the cover of the brown book, his name embossed, Robert C. Oelwang, and the date 1968. And when you opened it, on the right-hand side was the first page, and it talked about how a retail store is nothing more than a pile of bricks and concrete and glass until people breathe life into it. And then it talked about my dad as their chief guide rather than their boss. And then page after page in this book were things like, "Thank you, Bob, for helping me through a drug problem and not making me lose my job. Thank you, Bob, for giving me a second chance when I stole from the store. Thank you, Bob, for never forgetting Mother's Day for us single moms and giving us flowers on Mother's Day." And it went on and on like this. And I share this story because I think sometimes we think purpose is this big thing over here that we have to plaster on a wall and it has to be perfect. And really, my dad's purpose was bringing joy to every single person he met in his life, including those that he worked with. And there's a beautiful thing from the Virgin People Directors where they talked about the million magic moments and how important it is to have purpose in every interaction we have with people, so that we can change their lives for the better in each one of those interactions. And we have a chance to either make their life or make their life more difficult in those interactions. So I'm going to take the slides down now so we can just open into conversation with John. Thank
Jean,
you.
thanks so much. That was absolutely fascinating, and what a remarkable journey you've had. So inspiring, and I guess a thank you for choosing to have impact with your life, and so much impact you have had. I've been a witness to some of the work you've done with the B team and with the elders, and I think one of the great things was just to see Madiba and his sort of great friend Archbishop Desmond Tutu together doing good, and actually just getting to hang out together. I think is such a beautiful thing, especially as they were getting older, and how sad it is as a South African that they aren't with us anymore. Amazing to see the amplified impact at towards the end of their lives through the work you were doing. And it's just so fascinating to listen to you talk about partnerships and the power of great partnerships. And I certainly think a lot of the great things which have happened in our country as a South African come from those great partnerships. So just so fascinating to listen to. You spoke a lot about sort of business impact there, and I think I love your graph of the companies which look after people. I worked at Google for a long time, and I think Google was renowned as looking after its people. Someone once said to me, reputation is made during hard times, profits are made during good times. And it feels like we're in the process of going through hard times from a business point of view. And a lot of the big companies which have been so renowned for looking after their people have had to do retrenchments, and how they've done those retrenchments don't always feel like they've looked after their people as well as maybe they could have. But I thought, as I was listening to you talk about the power of business to have impact in the world, it is such an inspiring thing. I think if we go back throughout history, other institutions had the responsibility of having impact, and it's almost like business was not included in that group. It was sort of religion had the importance of having impact, government did. But just so exciting today to see great companies having impact. In the speaker series a few years ago, we had Paul Polman speak about his impact on Unilever. And it's just remarkable when you look at Unilever, how public facing they are about their desire to have impact, to do things which are good for the world and good for their sort of customers. And it's just such inspiring stuff to look at. As you sort of think about the companies out there in the world today, and we spoke a little bit about these sort of smaller organizations, and it's great also to see the big organizations having impact. I'd be intrigued to hear your sort of point of view on the opportunity for big business to have impact, and especially as you say, you open talking about the challenge in the world today. The importance of business to actually stand up for what they believe in. It feels like a unique moment in time. I'd love you to talk a little bit about your feelings about that.
Yeah, and I think I think my epiphany about the power of business actually happened when I was in South Africa. I moved to South Africa in 1995 to help work with a company called MTN. And I remember, this is how long ago it was, mid-90s, but it was, I remember we launched our prepaid service and we made our annual sales target within a month. And I remember going into the townships and seeing this incredible display of entrepreneurship where you had entrepreneurs that had actually put phones in a briefcase and they were selling calls from the briefcase. They've had them in trailer phones. And it was just extraordinary realization of when businesses really work and listen with communities about how you can scale change through companies as well. So that was definitely a massive epiphany. And I think where we are in this world right now, and again, if you look at the Edelman Trust Barometer results, it's not a matter of nice to have anymore for companies. People and customers and team members expect companies to have impact at their core and to have that North Star. And teams won't stay unless they feel like they have meaningful work. And I think the scary thing is right now is like, if you look at the latest Gallup poll, only about 78% of people, or I'm sorry, the other way around, 23% of people come into work engaged right now. So 77% of people come into work disengaged every day or miserable. And can you imagine if we flip that upside down and we really embedded purpose and meaning at the center of companies, and we had 80% of people coming in every single day doing meaningful work, we would have such a different world and we would be solving our problems in such a different way. And that's what we need to do with business right now. And I don't think there's a question of, there used to be, John, as we've spoken about, there used to be religion, government over here, solving the problems, business over here. And that's not even a conversation. It can't be a conversation anymore. It has to be all sectors coming together, figuring out how they can drive change. And that's where we're going to get scale change, when you see those sectors coming together. And we see that again and again, like that ozone story. We would never have protected the ozone story unless it had been government working on policy, unless it had been companies coming across competitive lines to come up with alternative products for CFCs. And we just did that with vaccines as well. And unless it had been not-for-profits rallying the world together. So we need to move away from this idea of hyper-individualism and, one company or one person has to be the savior, to thinking about how we do this as a collective. And that's a tremendous mindset shift.
That's incredible, Jean. As I was listening to you speaking there, I was just thinking how remarkable it is to have a full-time career which focuses on having impact in this crazy world, which has so much opportunity to do things better, and how inspiring that is. And as I say, listening to Paul Polman talk about the opportunity for upside of getting this right, and listening to you talk about it, I'm sure there are lots of people on the call, and I'm sitting here thinking the same thing. How, going from a telecom start, have you managed to build a career in having impact? And if other people on the call are looking to have more impact in their lives and their journey, what do you think the right way to approach that is?
Yeah, thank you for that beautiful question, John. And I think firstly, if you're working in a company like John worked in Google, when I worked in telco, you're still driving impact, and you could still be a social entrepreneur within a big company. And I think that's really important to realize, because not all people will be entrepreneurs that want to start their own thing. You can drive change from within a companies. And we've seen that at Virgin, working with 15 companies or 25 companies across 15 industries. You can drive tremendous change within a company. You have to make sure that the leadership believes in that and wants that and welcomes that. So I want to state that right up front. I think in my career, one of the most important things I did, which was really interesting because everyone always told me not to do it, is I made these disruptive detours. And I remember when I first started in telco, I worked there for, I think it was 3-4 years. And I decided I wanted to become a Vista volunteer in America, which is a little bit like the domestic Peace Corps. And I can remember everyone in the company at GTE that I was working for saying to me, don't do it. You're going to ruin your career. Don't step off the career ladder. And the very best decision I ever made in my life was actually stepping off the career ladder and doing that. And I ended up working in a homeless shelter with homeless teenagers, which it makes me sad to even say that, in Center City, Chicago, and with refugees in Chicago. And that totally changed my entire life, because it made me start to become focused on how do we change the way government, not-for-profit, and business are working together so we don't have a 12, 13, 14-year-old sleeping on the streets. And it changed the trajectory of my career. And then I think the second disruptive detour I made was actually working internationally. So I went back into telco after that. And then I started working in places like Bulgaria, South Africa, Colombia. And again, it was just really, that was an important disruptive detour to understand different cultures, to be able to really understand how to listen properly, and really pause and understand that one way wasn't the right way. And then the third disruptive detour I made was one when I was in Australia. I went to work for the National Parks and Wildlife Service and started to there again see that things were broken. Like we weren't working with businesses properly, weren't with government properly. And then when I got a call to work with Virgin, I originally went to work with them in Australia for their for-profit business to help start up a mobile phone company. And then I happened to overhear Richard talking in the car about wanting to do more. And Richard's was my boss at the time. He was on my board. He was the founder of the Virgin Group, Richard Branson. And I overheard him talking, and he wanted to do more philanthropically. So I went home and put together a business plan and presented that to him. And that was 20 years ago, the start of Virgin Unite. So I guess three things just in the question of the impact. I think, really take the time to think about what is that bonfire in your belly that you really want to change in the world. And that will evolve. It doesn't have to be perfect. Mine's evolved over my life. But then really make sure that you build those partnerships around you that are going to help you and that are going to support you towards that path. Make sure you think about taking those disruptive detours that you want to take in your life. And it may not be so radical. Maybe it is within your company. But make sure you take those things that are going to take you out of your comfort zone, because I really believe that comfort is probably one of the biggest enemies right now, because you don't step out of that comfort zone very often or often enough. And then I'd also really urge you to think big. Think audaciously. Don't ever underestimate your power and what you can do to change the world if you get together in partnerships and collectives. And there's a beautiful David White is a beautiful poet, and he had a beautiful quote about, if something or someone does not make you feel alive, it's too small for you. So think about that in all the relationships you're in the workplaces you're in, and make sure that you feel like you're able to live that purpose.
That's incredible. I loved, Jean, how you started there by saying even within your companies, you can be a social entrepreneur and you can have impact. And it just makes me think of this example in our company where two people, Lauren and Mumtaz, went off and created a video about, say, blood donation and how it was a completely spontaneous thing. I'm sure thousands of people will see this content, and it's just such a nice thing to see these pockets of social entrepreneurship. And as I was listening to you there, I do feel there's just this incredible power within small companies or big companies to go off and have impact. And it's just so inspiring to hear you say that. And I think such a great rallying cry for everyone on the call. As you were talking there, you touched on Richard, and I think Richard Branson is one of those people who has just had so much incredible positive energy in the minds of people around the world attached to him. And I thought perhaps you could talk a little bit about your journey working with Richard and perhaps any sort of highlights along that journey and what it's like to work with someone who has had so much impact alongside you in the world.
Yeah, and first, before I do that, I'd like to also shout out to you, John, because I saw you do what often people don't do, is I saw you when there was moments of places like when Madiba died or other, where you could bring this morally courageous voice into the world, where you really stepped into that. So I just wanted to give a shout out to you before I answer that question. And yeah, I've had the wonderful opportunity to work with Richard now for 23 years. We've had a partnership on working on the mobile side of the business and then the impact side of the business over those years. And I think a few examples. One, I'll share a story because I think listening is so important to him. And I really learned that also from him. And also making sure the thing I learned from him is who is missing from the table when we're listening. And I'll share a quick story of Virgin Mobile in Australia when we launched, because we had the leadership team and Richard was there for the launch in Australia. And we were all up in this boardroom waiting for him to come after the launch. And we couldn't find him anywhere in the building. And so we're looking for a couple hours. And then we went into the customer service center and we found Richard sitting in the customer service center with the customer service reps with headphones on, listening to customers. And he had his notebook with him. And then he walked back up into the boardroom and he had his notebook of about 30 things of what we were doing wrong and what we needed to improve. And it was such an important lesson for me right in the beginning around who we listen to, how we listen, and making sure we listen to the people that are actually proximate to what's going on, whether that's in our companies, whether it's to our issues. So I think that's one thing that he is brilliant at. I think the second thing is just his willingness to take risk. I don't think I've ever seen anyone in my life so courageous to take risks. And he does that not only in the for-profit side, but he does it in the not-for-profit side, which leads back to the thing that I think is most important that I've learned from him is never accepting the unacceptable, whether that's in a way a business is run, an industry is run, but also whether it is also in the way the world's working. If there's an issue that's unacceptable, no matter how small or big it is, he wants to do something about it. Like I'll never forget, he sat next to a woman on a plane who talked about this condition called fistula, which is a horrific birthing condition that makes women incontinent. And so he talked to this woman on the plane. He called me right after he got on the plane. Within 2 days, I was on a flight with a group of people to Nigeria to work up in northern Nigeria on this issue. So it's never accepting unacceptable and then linking that to action. So not just talking about, but figuring out how we make action. And another story I'll just share linked to that is in South Africa, when we were doing a lot of work with HIV/AIDS that was in the early years of Unite, so it was some 18 years ago. And I remember the South African president at the time had stood up talking about that this could be solved with beetroots. And, it was this, and Richard had a lot of businesses in South Africa, so he had a lot to lose, but he stood up on national TV in South Africa and went against that. And that was just that moment of moral courage where, again, you have a lot to lose on the other side, everyone telling him not to, and he still had that moral courage to stand up. So that's the other thing I'll share that I really respect from him.
Amazing, Jean. I certainly, as I reflect on the impact of Virgin Unite, I certainly, amongst the best projects, most exciting projects I've ever worked on in my life, a lot of them had Virgin Unite as one of the stakeholders in those partnerships. And yeah, just such a remarkable organization. Something I often think about in the world is the way media is built and the way the internet is built is that the villains get all the attention. It's the person who stands up with the gun and says something kind of mean, which happens in politics around our part of the world quite often. That person gets tens of millions of people to see that video. And the heroes don't get that much attention. And it's so interesting because the way the internet works is that, a scary headline drives the human mind to click on it way more than a non-scary headline. And it's just such a shame that the way the internet works, and you spoke a lot about the negative impact of social media, and I think that's where it comes from, is that a lot of the bad stuff surfaces to the top, unfortunately. And it's just so great to often see Virgin Unite heroing the good stuff and trying to hero the heroes in the world and give them the same amount of attention. As I listened to you there, Jean, something which struck me, a lot of the time, I think we as individuals think, well, here's something happening in Palestine and Israel, for example, here's something happening in the Ukraine, and it's terrible, but I can't do anything about that. And I can only imagine in your shoes, you look at that and you sometimes think, wow, I'm sure we can do something about that. And I'm just intrigued to know how that has, in the last year, as more sort of conflict in the world has arisen, how that sort of thought sort of has played through your mind and the organization and Virgin Unite as a team as well.
Yeah, and I think there's always something we can do about unacceptable issues, even if it's just making a comment using our voices. And I'd actually love to come back to that question you just asked to the audience right after I finish this answer about how do you guys feel like we can, with social media, start celebrating more of the good stuff and more of the heroes? Because I'd love to hear all of you guys on this call are way better at social media than I am. I can 100% guarantee that. So would love to hear from you on that. And, we have to really, one of the things that we are probably bad at is that we overstretch ourselves. Richard jokes that he's Mr. Yes, and now I'm Mrs. Yes, not Mr. and Mrs. Yes, but two people that always say yes. And so that we've had to surround our self with people that actually can help moderate us, because otherwise we'd be trying to do everything. But when there's something so unacceptable, like, for example, the war in Ukraine, we could not do something. And so last year we spent a lot of time on the ground in Ukraine, and going back and forth. And what was beautiful, though, I think the trick is you don't have to do everything yourselves. And that Ukraine's a perfect example of that, where we went into Ukraine and we traveled to Ukraine a few times last year and once this year. And we found these amazing partners, like this extraordinary guy, Andre, who was running the Ukraine's biggest shipping company before the war began. And when it began, he wanted to see what he could do to help his fellow citizens. So he found this amazing woman, Olga, who was running one of the largest foundations, and they formed a partnership. And we started talking to them about a year ago. And within this year, they had raised over $24 million. They built this extraordinary network of the best prosthetics doctors, because what they decided they wanted to do is they wanted all the people that were losing limbs in Ukraine not to be victims, but to be heroes. So they decided in the middle of a war zone, they wanted to build the world's best prosthetics hospital. That was something bigger. And so they got this network, they raised this money. And then 3 months ago, we were on the ground in Ukraine helping them launch this hospital that was built already, and seeing actually patients get the best prosthetics in the world. And I share that story because I think when you couple partnership with purpose and urgency, we become unstoppable as human beings. And I think sometimes we get stuck because we think we have to do it all ourselves. But if you can seed it, and like they did all that work, and what we did is we helped seed the connections. We helped seed the connections to the funding, seed the connections to some of the doctors, and then use Richard's voices. So I think it's thinking about what all of us can do uniquely, but also what we can do when we come together in collectives. And that's, again, where that magic happens, because it is hard right now. It becomes overwhelming. But I think, our lives light up and we become who we are and become better humans when we're in service to others, not when we're in control, when we're in service. And I think thinking about all of those moments where we can do that will make sure that all of our lives as individuals become something that's meaningful.
Jean, I love that. And I just before I ask if anyone has an answer on the call to Jean's question about something which we can each individually do. But I just love that sort of rallying cry of our lives are so much more meaningful when they have purpose in them. And I think, one of the things I've experienced within companies is like one of the greatest purposes we have as leaders of companies is just the state of mind of the people in your sort of in your team. And I think so many companies I've worked in over time, there's been an accepted toxic culture where we know this is not good for everyone's state of mind, but that's just the way work is. And I think one of the most powerful ways we can have impact is this sort of just ensuring that the people just around you are in a good state of mind. I think there's just so much power there. And as I listen to you say that, it really sort of it is inspiring. I don't know if anyone wants to put their hand up and have an answer to Jean's question about what we can do as individuals to have impact in the world today. And if there are no hands, I'll jump to the next one.
Yeah, and use social media to really share those good stories.
I'd like to shoot. I was just incredibly inspired by what you said, Jean, about depth of relationships and breadth of relationships from the Harvard study, and it's the depth that really counts. And what struck me is just how shallow we can live sometimes, just sort of moving through life. And I think something super, super simple is just engaging with people around you, smiling, being polite, and just treating everyone in a really kind way. I think that is like the simplest thing, to treat everyone like humans and just increase that depth just a little bit.
That's beautiful, Andre. And I don't know if you find this, but when you do that and you smile, you talk to someone, you feel that positive energy. I don't know if you felt that when you've done that.
Always. They always smile back. It is like an instant reaction, an autopilot reaction we all have. And it's this wonderful, positive, some way of creating happiness because it bounces back on you.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
I love that, Andre. Thanks for sharing. One of the things which I think, I always say the older I get, the more I believe that values are important. And I remember someone asking me my values when I was just leaving school, and it was such a crazy question to try to get your head around, even understanding what matters. And I remember, first hiring for our company, someone saying to me, integrity is the most important thing. I think it was Tim Brown, who we both know. And at the time I was like, no, surely competency and work ethic are the most important thing. And it's just so funny how over time, things like integrity become very clear to you why it's so important. And I'm just intrigued, Jean, listening to you, what values you feel are most important to you, and perhaps anything which you've come across outside of yourself, which also feels like incredibly powerful when you're looking to do something great in the world.
Yeah, and I'm going to cheat a little bit here because I feel like I have a responsibility, because we sat at the feet of some of these great elders and folks and just share some of the things that I saw in them. And, Kofi Annan was a great hero of mine. And when he passed, there was a team member that spoke at his celebration of life. And I remember the team member getting up on stage and saying he had a quiet power. And that always sticks in my head. And, when I look at these elders and some of these B team leaders, I think one of the most central important things is this moral courage that they have and that they hold, and that they're not frightened to use that moral courage. And I think also that links back to what we talked about today, is that they have this sense of shared humility and what I would call almost an informed confidence, where they know where their strengths are and where their voice can make a difference. But they also put a power in listening to others and understanding that they don't have all the answers. And that they link to that is this beautiful, I would say, it's not really a value, it's a way of being around curiosity and constantly being curious about other people, about the world, about issues and about problems. And what was really interesting in terms of values and virtues within partnerships, when we did those interviews and we coded thousands of pages of transcripts, the 6 virtues that came up were respect and trust, which were the top 2 constantly. Trust number 1, respect number 2, and the 2 had to go hand in hand. And then belief in one another, belief in something bigger than yourself. And then also this concept of humility, but also shared generosity and also compassionate empathy. So not just having empathy with someone, which can often be like, I would call it tourism empathy, but lacking that compassion to have action linked to that empathy. And those 6 virtues came up again and again, but they weren't just something, I think all of us have probably been in situations where someone plasters virtues or values on a wall, but they don't live them. So the trick is figuring out how you live those virtues on a daily basis.
Fascinating, Jean. That makes so much sense. As I saw your photograph of the elders there were so many remarkable people in there, and it's just so sad that a number of them have passed. Being a South African, of course, Nelson Mandela made such a difference to our journey, and so did Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and I saw both of them in that photograph, and it sort of is a very heartwarming thing to see them both in the same space. I just love to know your point of view, sitting in a room with those people, and both, if you don't mind talking specifically to Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu, and just anything which struck you as particularly remarkable about them, just because they, of course, are such remarkable humans.
Their friendship. That's what made them so remarkable. And I remember the first time we went to Mandela and Graça with this massive book of thousands of potential elders when we were selected, because they ultimately selected the elders. And so I remember Nelson Mandela sitting there, going through page by page, looking at different people. And then he got to this page and he just started pointing and he started to laugh and giggle and say that, he said, and this one dares to make fun of my colorful shirts, and he wears a purple dress every day. And of course, it was Archbishop Tutu. And then he just went on, and you could just see like the love like lit up the room. And so I think their friendship was so important, to have that resilience with each other, to be able to have those honest conversations, because they didn't agree, as probably many of you know, on everything, but they were able to disagree without being disagreeable. And they also had 2 things which just always stick in my head. One was, Archbishop Tutu a lot of the times talked about joy as a discipline. You have to bring joy into the room. And they both had that. They were both joking and teasing. And, some of the stuff was ridiculous and silly, but then they would just like break out in this unbelievable laughter. And I don't think we have enough joy and play and laughter in our lives right now. And the other thing that they both talked about a lot, which is another Archbishop Tutu quote, is we're prisoners of hope, and they never lost hope. They never lost that light, no matter how bad and how dark it is. And that's something that I hold always in my heart now, especially right now when the world is in such trauma, is we can't lose the light. All of us on this call cannot afford to lose the light, because we owe it to the people, those 2 billion people that are sitting in conflict zones right now. We owe it, because if we lose the light, then we will lose our ability to act. So that sticks in my mind, those few things. Sorry, I went a little bit long on that.
No, I absolutely love those. And Desmond Tutu's sense of humor was sort of well renowned in this space. And I remember a couple of years before he passed, he actually told the joke about what's going to happen when he reaches the gates of heaven, which I thought was just he was always so open to sort of make fun of himself at the same time. I've got a question from the audience here. You spoke a little bit about how social media has the power to have a lot of negative impact on the state of minds of people. Jean, do you still have 10 minutes, or are you sort of out of time there?
I think I'm out of time. I'm so sorry.
Okay. No.
Another meeting. I apologize so much. So someone
no, that's perfect. This is the time. This is the amount of time we asked for. So, yeah, let me not finish that question then. And I just wanted to say then a massive thank you to you for your time, to Soumya and team for your amazing introductions and making this all happen. And you, just a huge thank you on behalf of everyone here for your life of impact and for having so much impact on the world. And it's just, I think, so inspiring to see businesses having great impact and to see people who've chosen to have incredible impact on the world to help make the future better for all of us. So just a huge thank you from all of us.
No, huge thank you to you guys. You guys are also just people that give me hope, because I think right now the world just needs great leaders. And so I'm so excited to see all of you guys coming into this world right now. And we owe all of you guys to try to fix it as much as we can, because I know we're the ones that messed it up. So apologies on behalf of my generation. And again, we'll keep on trying to work hard to do what we can. But a huge thanks to all of you on this call and all of you that put together the call as well. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, Jane. So appreciate your time.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.